He has betrayed our national security, and he will do so again. He has compromised our elections, and he will do so again. You will not change him. You cannot constrain him. He is who he is. Truth matters little to him. What's right matters even less, and decency matters not at all.
That was Congressman Adam Schiff during the first impeachment trial of Donald Trump. He's written a new book taking us inside that fight and the fight ahead. Welcome to The Issue Is. I'm Elex Michaelson. Congressman Schiff says that even though Donald Trump is no longer president, the threat to the country remains. Here's that new book. It is titled Midnight in Washington: How We Almost Lost Our Democracy and Still Could. Congressman Schiff, welcome to The Issue Is, and congrats on the book being #1.
Thank you. No one could be more surprised than me.
Well, the book starts by talking about January 6th. And before we get into much of the specifics of the book, let's talk about the big news of this week. And it's related to January 6th. You're part of the January 6th Commission. We want to show some video up on the screen of some folks that you all have subpoenaed. These are former Trump White House officials. Steve Bannon is saying he is not going to answer your subpoena. And now you're saying that he should potentially face criminal charges because of it. What specifically do you mean by criminal contempt? Do you think that Steve Bannon should be arrested if he doesn't come and testify?
Steve Bannon was subpoenaed to come appear this week, produce documents. He didn't either. And you can't just simply say, well, I don't care to show up for a deposition. That's not how compulsory process works. What our chairman has decided to do, and I fully support the decision, is we're going to have a business meeting on Tuesday. We're going to take up a report that recommends holding him in criminal contempt. If it passes out of our committee, as I expect it will, it'll be taken up on the House floor. And if it passes there, as I expect it will be sent to the Justice Department. And the law provides that the Justice Department has a duty to then present it to the grand jury. So yes, if you refuse legal process, you could be prosecuted. And if that's what's necessary to get answers, then that's what we'll do.
Ultimately, meaning you think that if he doesn't testify, that he should go to jail?
That will ultimately be the judge's decision, what kind of penalty, what kind of remedy to compel his testimony. But yes, I think people that refuse their legal obligations ought to be fined or go to jail, whatever is necessary to get them to submit to the lawful orders of the Congress and the courts.
Are you concerned, though, about the precedent that might set for the future? Say the Republicans take over Congress and then they try to arrest you or Hunter Biden or Joe Biden or somebody else to try to get payback.
I'm more concerned, frankly, about the precedent of the last 4 years, where Trump official after Trump official just thumbed their nose at the Congress and knew there would be no repercussion for ignoring the law. At the time, you had an attorney general like Bill Barr, who himself was in contempt and wasn't about to enforce the law against those covering up for the president, the now former president. So I'm more worried about that precedent. Will Republicans abuse the power? Well, they have shown every interest and willingness in abusing power in any way. My guess is they will do that no matter what Democrats do responsibly. They will use power if they gain it to act irresponsibly, which is why we must make sure that Kevin McCarthy never goes near the Speaker's office.
Let's talk about the merits of what you're investigating on January 6th. One of the key questions you're trying to get at is, what was President Trump doing that day? What do you know now about what he was doing that day? And was he directing his supporters?
Well, you're absolutely right. That is one of the central questions in this investigation. There are a lot of things we're looking at. We're looking at how were these rallies organized? Where did the money come from? What understanding or expectation of violence did people have organizing them? But the biggest unknowns are what was taking place in the White House, what was taking place with the president, why backup wasn't sent to the Capitol sooner, what the president knew about the propensity for violence that day. Was this an effort after everything else failed, after his litigation bombed, after his efforts to use the Justice Department to coerce Georgia or to manufacture false claims of fraud in the elections, after those things failed? Was this the last-ditch effort to use violence or the threat of violence to get Mike Pence to violate his constitutional duty? Those are the questions we're determined to answer, among many others.
Do you have an answer to any of that yet, though?
I don't have a complete answer, no. We certainly have been gaining information. We made requests for voluminous documents, many of which we've received, others of which the former president is fighting. He doesn't want us to see the evidence. You can ask, well, why is that? What is he afraid of? But the good news is the current administration is not asserting executive privilege. They recognize these are extraordinary circumstances. This information really belongs to the American people.
In the book, you paint a picture of your experience on January 6th, and some GOP lawmakers were legitimately worried about your safety. We want to put this quote up on the screen. This is what you say. "You can't let them see you," a Republican member said. And then another one said to me, "He's right." Another Republican member said, "I know these people. I can talk to them. I can talk my way through them. You're in a whole different category." So were they essentially suggesting that if this mob saw you, they were trying to kill you?
Yes, I think it was very clear what they were suggesting. One of them was carrying a wooden post that still had a hand sanitizer affixed to it that he was going to use to protect himself from these rioters. So they too were worried about their safety, but they were more concerned that I was a target of this mob. And at first I was kind of touched by their evident concern. But then that feeling soon gave way to another, that if so many of them hadn't been pushing this big lie about the election, none of us would need to worry about our security. And what's so distressing today, Alex, is they continue to push that big lie all around the country. Even the third-ranking Republican was asked about it on Fox this weekend, and wouldn't deny the former president's false claims about the election being stolen. If people are led to believe that our elections can no longer be counted on to decide who should govern, that really does pave the way for violence. And that's one of the concerns I write about.
And that's Steve Scalise, who you're quoting right there. On January 6th itself, after they said that to you, were you legitimately scared for your own safety?
I was. It was hard for me to evaluate initially how many people were outside the Capitol, how big and massive a crowd it was. I didn't learn until later how vigorously they were beating police officers. But when they started breaking glass in the House chamber, when the Capitol Police started shouting, "You need to get out," there's nothing like that to get your attention. But it was one of those rare, maybe not so rare, traumatic situations where the trauma of it grows without time. I think for many members of Congress, once they did see all of that footage and realized just how massive that crowd was, it only accentuated how we felt about it. But I have to say, those people that were attacking the Capitol that day, they believed the big lie. What so infuriated me about many of the people inside the chamber was that they pushed the big lie knowing it was a lie. And to me, that's unforgivable.
And on that day, you had warned that President Trump would try to cheat when it comes to the election, and your colleagues reminded you of that on January 6th. Here's another quote from the book. A lawmaker says, "You warned that he would try to cheat again. It didn't require any great clairvoyance," I replied. And then I added, "Someone really should have impeached that son of a you-know-what." Of course, you were the impeachment manager. But what's interesting to note is you weren't always eager to impeach. Here you are on the very first episode of The Issue Is on May of 2018. On that day, you had written an op-ed in the New York Times about why Democrats shouldn't impeach the president. Let's watch.
Well, my main point is, ironically, Donald Trump is out there talking about impeachment to his base and trying to suggest Democrats are not interested in governing. They're just interested in getting rid of me. That's a trap I think he would like Democrats to fall in. I think we should let the investigations run their course, and Democrats would be wise to be campaigning on what they're going to do to deliver for their constituents on the economy and jobs, on health care and things that really affect their immediate lives.
What goes through your mind when you see that?
Well, you're absolutely right. I was not one of those people who was calling for Trump's impeachment the moment he got elected. Far from it. I was trying to push back against that, particularly while the investigation was still ongoing. And I think at the time you and I were talking, the Mueller investigation was still proceeding. We didn't know what his report would say. We didn't know what his conclusions would be. And so from my point of view, it was premature to be talking about the ultimate remedy. And I think, frankly, that helped me make the case in the Senate. The fact that I wasn't an earlier eager proponent, that I thought only under extraordinary circumstances should we use that remedy. But when we saw the president's further misconduct, and this was a really important factor to me, the president was on the phone with the head of Ukraine the day after Bob Mueller testified. That is, the day after he thought he escaped any responsibility, accountability for the Russian misconduct. He was back on the phone once again trying to get the help of another foreign country to help him cheat in an election. And that was enough for me. That really convinced me that we needed to move forward with impeachment.
Well, you write about that Bob Mueller testimony, and what you've said about it is making some news, because you're suggesting that he may not have been all there mentally because of his age. And that was a troubling thing for a lot of you. Walk us through that, and what should we think about the Mueller investigation itself, knowing that?
Well, this was a very difficult chapter for me to write, because I have just incredible respect and reverence for Bob Mueller. I think he's a tremendous human being and tremendous public servant. But I also wanted to be candid about what it was like. And so I describe in the book asking the members of the Intelligence Committee to sit with me in the skiff in that bunker 3 floors below the Capitol and watch Mueller's first testimony before the Judiciary Committee hours before he would testify before our committee. And I was shocked at the changes that I had seen in him, that I witnessed. And we quickly began to change the nature of the questions and cut them down and make them much shorter and specific, not ask for narrative answers. And it's part of the historic record that I think needed to be told. But I wanted to tell it in a respectful way. I hope I did, because I think he's a tremendous public servant.
Do you think the expectation game for Robert Mueller got way off? I mean, there were a lot of people that thought there was this massive Russia conspiracy between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, that Robert Mueller was going to expose all of that. And then when it didn't happen, there was a lot of disappointment, distrust. What happened there? And the fact that Robert Mueller was having those difficulties, does that concern you?
Well, I think what happened, and this was really a situation with unequal resources certainly in terms of propagating the message on the side of Donald Trump and on the side of Bob Mueller. When you look at what was actually produced by the Mueller investigation, by our own investigation, and that of good investigative journalism, it's very damning. Just look at one fact, Elex. The Trump campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, was giving internal campaign polling and information about their strategic thinking in battleground states to an agent of Russian intelligence, while that same Russian intelligence agency was embarking on a social media campaign to elect Donald Trump. Now, anyone else would call that collusion. The only question is whether it would be the crime of conspiracy. But when you have the biggest bully pulpit in the world like Trump did, you can just repeat like a mantra, no collusion, no obstruction. And you've got Bob Mueller, on the other hand, who was utterly silent until his report. It's in terms of getting the point across, there's a really disparate advantage in the White House. And one other advantage the president had, the former president, is he had an attorney general in Bill Barr who was cravenly willing to completely misrepresent Bob Mueller's work. And one final observation about this. I think that Donald Trump believes that everyone is just like him, that everyone lies because he lies, everybody's corrupt because he's corrupt. I think in a kind of an opposite way, Bob Mueller, being a man of such great rectitude and integrity, presumes that other people behave the same way he does. And I have to think that it was a terrible shock to him to be so betrayed by Bill Barr, to have his work of 2 years so misrepresented. And I do think it a terrible shame that he was not able to speak more plainly about his conclusions and about the criminality of the former president, particularly when it concerns obstruction of justice.
We're talking with Adam Schiff in his book, Midnight in Washington. He talks about his experience as an impeachment manager. Here's some of those arguments.
If the truth doesn't matter, we're lost. Framers couldn't protect us from ourselves if right and truth don't matter. And you know that what he did was not right.
We know that Mitt Romney eventually voted for impeachment. He was the only Republican that did. As you were actually making those arguments, did you think that there would be enough Republicans to convict him, to remove him? Did you realize that a lot of this was political theater? Did you think there was anything you could have said that would change the result?
I knew going into the trial that we were very likely going to lose. And I remember talking to the speaker about it, and I said, you know, I think the challenge is how do you win by losing? And I think the way you win by losing is by recognizing that there are two juries. There's the jury in the Senate, which is going to be so heavily predisposed against you, and then there's the jury of the American people. And my goal was to win over the jury of the American people if I could, knowing that getting Republican senators to vote to convict a president of their party would be enormously difficult. But I will say this about that argument you just played. To me, this was one of the core realizations of the trial in the last 4 years. When I was making those arguments about the president's lack of morality, the inability to tell right from wrong, I could see each senator's reaction. None of them, none of the Republicans, certainly none of the Democrats, none of them were shaking their heads. Oh, no, that's not the Donald Trump we know. He would never do that. They understood exactly who we were dealing with. Yet they lacked the courage to fulfill their oath. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how well the Constitution is drafted. There's nothing wrong with the impeachment remedy or how it's written. What it requires is people of good faith to give those constitutional provisions the kind of meaning that the founders intended. And if they're not willing to do that, then none of it works. And that's, I think, why our system is at such risk right now.
You write about the past, but you also write about the future. And when you look into the future, there's a real possibility that Kevin McCarthy of California becomes the next Speaker of the House. You write about the fact that you had an experience with him on a plane, and then he ended up lying entirely about your conversation to the press, and then basically suggesting to you, you know, that's the game, that's how it works. What does this country look like if Kevin McCarthy is Speaker of the House?
Well, it would look exactly like if Donald Trump were Speaker of the House, because effectively he would be. Kevin McCarthy is not going to stand up to Donald Trump in any way. And that means that Donald Trump today is telling people in a statement that he issued this week that if they don't prove non-existent fraud in the last election, that he's going to tell people not to vote in the next one. And so Kevin McCarthy will carry that message and other messages, and he will take actions in the House, whatever Donald Trump wants. That conversation that I spell out in the book, that was in 2010. That was years before Donald Trump. But in this respect, Kevin McCarthy was really made for a moment like this, when his party doesn't believe the truth really matters. They believe in alternate facts. They believe that truth isn't truth. You say whatever you need to say. You do whatever you need to do to capture power. And I realize there's a lot of cynicism about politics in the public, but that is not the way it is. That's not how most of us operate. And we cannot allow the leadership of either party, in this case, the leadership of the Republican Party, to occupy such an important position of responsibility if it is utterly unwilling to tell the truth about something as fundamental as our elections.
Don't you think that Donald Trump is the overwhelming favorite to be the Republican nominee for president next time, assuming that he runs? And Joe Biden's poll numbers right now are not very good. I mean, there's a real good chance that he wins again.
First of all, I'm certain that Donald Trump is going to run for president again. And I say that because I think he would find it intolerable if someone else got all that attention. If Nikki Haley or Mike Pence or DeSantis or any of these people were to be the Republican nominee, he would go out of his mind. So I think pathologically he cannot help but run. And at the moment, he has got such a grip on that party that I would certainly expect if he runs, he'll be the nominee. If he's the nominee, we are going to beat him because we have to, because the democracy will ride on it. And we will not survive another 4 years of Donald Trump and have a country with a democracy that looks anything like what it does today. In terms of President Biden's poll numbers, once we get these bills passed, which we will, and hopefully very soon, I think you'll see those numbers go back up. And once we get this pandemic under control, you'll also see those numbers rise. And there, it's tough because you have a cohort of Americans who are just unwilling to get vaccinated. Some because they're afraid of the vaccine because of misinformation. Some because they view it now as a political issue. But unless we can persuade enough of our fellow Americans to get vaccinated so that we can get the kind of herd immunity that we need, it's going to be very hard to turn the corner on this awful virus.
Let's end on a couple quick questions just about you. We've known each other for a long time, and I knew you before you were this big national figure, right? Before Donald Trump.
I knew you before you were this big national figure.
And you were not seen as this like hyper-partisan guy. And then Donald Trump came and you became this national thing, this symbol of the resistance. How did Donald Trump change your life?
Well, you're absolutely right. I have not changed. I still don't view myself as partisan. I am anti-Trump. Look, I think he wants to be an autocratic ruler of the country. He's made common cause with autocrats around the globe, and I think he is immoral and untruthful, and I think he's been a disaster. So yes, I'm going to fight that because I think it's dangerous for the country. That doesn't, in my view, make me a partisan. On the January 6th Select Committee, I worked with two very conservative Republicans, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. All of us on that Select Committee worked together extremely well. There is no partisanship on that committee. That's the way it should be. But I view her and both Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger as the heirs of the Republican Party, as those that still believe in a party of ideology and ideas. But Trump certainly made me a household name. And he actually gave me a whole lot of household names, as a matter of fact. But I don't feel I've changed. I do think the circumstances have.
And last question. I know you actually wrote this book yourself, which almost nobody in Washington actually does. It is your first book. When did you find the time, and how did you remember everything? Because I know you weren't like journaling every day.
Well, over the last 4 years, any number of folks, especially my colleagues, said, I hope you're writing this down. You really need to be writing this down. You're in the middle of history. And I would say, when do I possibly have the time to write any of this down? And then the pandemic hit, and I was confined to quarters like so many Americans. And I finally said to myself, if I'm ever going to write this down, I need to do it now, and I ought to do it while it's fresh. But I have to tell you, I thought it would be easier than it was. It was a lot harder than I thought. I thought I would just remember all these things, but I had to go back and do careful research and watch old interviews with you and with others to get back in the moment. And some of that was traumatic, but other parts of it were really inspiring once again to literally hear Alexander Vindman's voice again and to see Marie Yovanovitch stare down the President of the United States and testify when she was told not to. So those moments once again inspired me.
Well, so are you saying that you did a lot of TV interviews? You had a lot to reference.
I did. I basically had a video journal, so that was helpful.
That was your version of a journal. All right, Congressman, we always appreciate the time from week one until now, and now best-selling author Adam Schiff. Great conversation.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. Really appreciate it. I know you're doing a million of these, but I know this is your favorite.
Absolutely. You be well. Thank you again.
All right, bye-bye.